Hello again. A new study reveals that almost half of all people of Pakistani ancestry in the northern English city of Bradford marry their cousins. This, it is said, is an improvement on the situation 10 years ago. This may perhaps be true, but it is still an appalling state of affairs, and one which imposes a huge cost, both financial and social, on the rest of us. That is to say, upon taxpayers and users of the National Health Service, who choose not to marry our cousins for obvious reasons. Of course, by merely focusing on a small area of a single city, this report avoids letting us know that this is a national problem and that it affects London just as much, if not more, than it does Bradford. A report from the London Borough of Redbridge a few years ago, for instance, showed that 1 in 5 child deaths in the borough were a direct result of what are known as consanguineous marriages. This expression means couples who are closely related, first couples or closer. You may well ask yourself what kind of marriage could possibly be closer than first cousins. Best not to ask. In Britain as a whole, that is to say outside communities of Pakistani or Bangladeshi heritage, the rate of cousin marriages is 1 in 25,000. Cousin marriages are a terrible idea, and although they're legal in Britain, they are the object of a popular taboo as steering closer than is comfortable to incest. As I'll explain, all inbreeding families, anything closer than a second cousin, is likely to lead to difficulties in the long term. The chief reason that cousin marriages are undesirable is that they hugely increase the chance of any offspring being sickly, dying young, or suffering from some genetic defect or other, or doing poorly at school. One remembers the royal families of Europe, who were in the past very fond of this practice. The Habsburgs notoriously preferred to marry into their own line, and this led not only to distinctive physical characteristics such as the so-called Habsburg jaw, but also a powerful strain of mental deficiency. Charles II of Spain was a classic example of this tendency, being unable to speak until he was 4 due to a very large tongue and, of course, an extreme form of the Habsburg jaw. He didn't walk until he was 8 and always had trouble even as an adult in talking. This was possibly connected with his family background. His mother and father were uncle and niece, and the complicated family connections meant that his father was also his uncle, and Charles was his mother's cousin as well as her son. His grandmother was also his aunt. The British royal family too fell victim to the perils of inbreeding within a small group. When one person is a carrier of a defective gene, such as that for sickle cell or haemophilia, then there's a risk of not only passing this on to children, but if such a person has children with a person who shares the trait, then the full-blown syndrome may result in their offspring. Of course, if you and your relatives have for centuries been marrying each other, then traits such as haemophilia may become more common than in the general population. Queen Victoria carried the gene for haemophilia and married her cousin Albert, who was also a carrier of the gene. This led to one of their children, Leopold, being born with the disease itself. He died from a hemorrhage after a fall. Because Victoria's children married into other European royal families, the disease showed up in the Russian and Spanish royal families too, most famously with the son of Tsar Nicholas, who died in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution. This sort of thing is a problem, as I've just explained, which doesn't affect only people of Pakistani ancestry. Ashkenazi Jews also suffer the medical consequences of a high degree of inbreeding today. We observe that cousin marriages have traditionally been more popular in that community than most others. It was noted in 19th century England that cousin marriages were 3.5 times more common among Jews than they were among Christians. Marriages between cousins, although legal in most countries, are, as I said earlier, sometimes looked at a little askance as tending slightly towards the incestuous. The mild disapproval sometimes evinced is perhaps associated with the increased risk of genetic problems being passed down. Even more likely to raise eyebrows, by the by, is the fact that the Talmud, the ancient guide to the practice of Judaism, specifically allows marriages between a man and his sister's daughter, which is illegal in most countries and even more hazardous from a genetic perspective. Indeed, the situation in the Ashkenazi community is similar, although not as bad as that among Pakistanis in Britain. In the modern world, Ashkenazi Jews provide a good example of how genetic disorders may be perpetuated in a group which tends to avoid mating with outsiders. Ashkenazis, who make up 80% of the world's Jews, lived for centuries in closed communities in Eastern Europe, marrying only among themselves. This provided the perfect opportunity for genetic disorders to become established. It's been known for many years that Tay-Sachs disease, which prevents the nerves of babies and children from working properly, is especially prevalent among Ashkenazi Jews. In Britain, the National Health Service website advises speak to your GP if you're planning a pregnancy and you or your partner have an Ashkenazi Jewish background. There's a predisposition towards other lethal diseases among Ashkenazi Jews. In the mid-1990s, it was discovered that they had a 1 in 40 chance of carrying a mutation of the BRCA1 and 2 genes, thus greatly increasing the chances of women developing breast or ovarian cancer. These became known, in fact, as the Ashkenazi BRCA mutations, and mean that the Ashkenazi Jews had the highest risk of any population for this problem. The situation with genetic disorders, though, is of course much worse in England's Pakistani community, who have a very high rate of cousin marriages. In 2014, the results of a research project into the alarming number of young children dying in the Midlands city of Birmingham was published. The report of the work, which was carried out in large part by the Enhanced Genetic Services Project, under the auspices of the National Health Service in Birmingham, was shocking. It was found that the rate of stillbirths and infant deaths definitely or probably due to cousin marriages between people of Pakistani heritage was 38 times that of white European babies. Over half of school children of Pakistani heritage in Britain are the product of cousin marriages. The incidence of genetic birth defects is 10 times that of the white British population. Academic underachievement in this community is widespread too, and according to a survey of children in English schools in 2011, profound multiple learning difficulties are more common among Pakistani and Bangladeshi children. From all of which, it will be rightly guessed that I do not think that news that almost half of marriages in part of an English city are between first cousins, or people even more closely related than that, is particularly brilliant. However much we may try to be sensitive to the needs and wishes of other communities in our country, this is a custom which has an enormous and wholly negative impact on the rest of us, and I feel that we are accordingly entitled to express our views on the subject. I'm not alone in this view, for I observe that the topic of Pakistani families in Bradford is currently trending on Twitter. As usual, in the description to this video, I give links to news items and academic references to support the things which I have been discussing.